Saturday Morning All-Star Hits is a Netflix comedy series centered around the late 80s, early 90s kids shows and cartoons. It's posed in a found footage format of recorded airings of a cartoon block. Anybody who grew up during this era will know the aesthetic. The too cool for school California surfer vibe, the blatant parody of absurd cartoon ideas. It's all very nostalgic, but it's also delivered with exceptional quality placed in the parody, and it also comes with just as much pointed satire. The parody is in the style of the show. The cartoons being shown are obvious parodies in how they look. The simplistic animation, the aged quality of VHS recordings, and the dated music are all part of the parody. It also helps that the cartoons feature the voices of Maurice LaMarche and Frank Welker, two voice actors who were very active in television animation of that era. But if that late 80s, early 90s style is what the show is parodying, then what exactly is it satirizing? Well, the show is satirizing existentialism, which is the questioning of our own meaning and existence. More specifically, the satire focuses on the dread that one feels through existentialism, that perhaps our existence appears meaningless in a world that is absurd. In other words, the show is about the fear of death. Not so much death of the physical form. I mean, yes, there is a murder that builds throughout the series to the climax, but there are different forms of death that are more prominent in the show. Every segment of the show features characters who fear their own death of relevancy in a world that they struggle to understand. So, the show centers around the cartoon program S.M.A.S.H, hosted by the identical twins of Skip and Trebor. Skip finds himself climbing higher into fame when he gets a brief cameo in one of the cartoons. That cameo turns into a bigger role. That bigger role turns into his own show, and his own show turns him into a movie star. All the while, Trebor is left behind and constantly looked down upon by his brother. Trebor fears his own irrelevancy and suspects that his time on television will be brief. This leads to him trying to crash the set of his brother's movie and later ambushing him on the red carpet. At the same time that this storyline's going on, the pop star Johnny Rash pops into segments to promote his music and movies. As the series progresses, he is accused of the missing bodies of a sitcom couple. He spends his time running from the truth, leading to a televised chase similar to O.J. Simpson. He doesn't want to accept that he caused death, as it will mean his career will also die. This desperation continues on into all the cartoon segments as well. The cartoon Randy follows the adventures of a dinosaur living among humans, an obvious parody of Denver the Last Dinosaur. However, Randy becomes an older teenager and his life becomes more complicated. He struggles with his relationships, his alcoholism, and his life at college. When he arrives at college, he discovers that there's more than one dinosaur there. He's no longer all that special and is easily picked on by the other dinosaurs. He's no longer unique and no longer an interesting character. The death of his relevancy is nigh. The Create-A-Crittles is an amalgamation of Care Bears, Alvin and the Chipmunks, and pretty much any cartoon involving cuddly characters among humans. The show follows David, a father and husband who tries to hide his magical friends of the Create-A-Crittles. He struggles to keep them a secret from both his family and his workplace. The Crittles represent David's decaying sense of childhood and creativity. They want to help out David and show him how to still have fun in adulthood, but they are also drug addicts and have bitter feuds over careers and relationships. David's concealment of the Crittles nearly costs him his job and his family. It's only once David learns to let go of this relationship and be more honest that his life starts turning around. David learns to grow up, but also not be ashamed of his colorful past or his creative side. Death of the past doesn't have to mean the death of personality. By the final episode, the Crittles leave David to pursue different adventures. His childhood is essentially over, but it isn't ruined. It's time for someone else's life to be changed by the Crittles. It's time to let the kids play with his toys. One of the most depressing cartoons on the block is Lil Bruce. It's a parody of those common cartoons where celebrities will often be portrayed as their younger selves in a cartoon. The closest comparison is obviously Bobby's World, but there were so many from that era. Lil Bruce focuses on the childhood of the comedian Bruce Chandling, who also narrates the show and provides all the voices. However, as Bruce continues to narrate in his pilot episode, he starts having second thoughts about the story that he's telling. The episode is about himself coming home from school to learn that his mom and dad are getting a divorce. Bruce tries to make the story seem fun by letting his imagination run wild, but the only thing that he can muster is a cowboy dream, where he is constantly being put in jail. Lil Bruce is used by the comedian to display how relatable childhood can be, but in truth, it ends up saying more about how much it sucks to be an adult with regrets. Bruce is dealing with the death of adolescence, something that seems to only resonate with himself and not the child audience. When Lil Bruce is focus tested, kids find themselves unable to relate to his cartoon. It is then cancelled after one episode. This aspect highlights how cartoons of the era were ill-equipped to handle more mature topics. Cartoons of this nature could not exactly grow with their audience to be something more. They were usually just expected to stay the same throughout. Bobby's World never portrayed Bobby entering high school, and the Care Bears never touched on adult topics of sexual affairs or drug use. All of that just felt off limits for Saturday morning cartoons, because their presence would ruin the illusion. It would kill a certain childhood innocence by doing so. That message is hammered home pretty overtly when S.M.A.S.H attempts to add a cartoon based on an erotic thriller. We don't really see much of this cartoon, and for good reason. The lineup of S.M.A.S.H shows us these taboos, and how they make the cartoons uncomfortable to watch for adults, let alone children. Another show that displays this anxiety of adulthood more nuanced is Pro Bros, a parody of the cartoon Pro Stars. The show features a trio of characters who are less prominent brothers to their more successful siblings. The greedy villains that they fight are also analogies for their more successful siblings as well. Pro Bros is framed as a moral story about drugs and greed, but really it's a revenge fantasy for the bitter series creator Ethan Rush, filtered through the lens of Saturday morning cartoons. For Ethan, he fears his own death via irrelevancy in the shadow of his pop star brother Johnny Rash. He struggles to fight off such a death by developing this cartoon, but to an adult audience, this motivation comes off as desperate in his writing that clearly lets the allegory slip several times. This is most obvious with how Ethan writes himself into the show, and clearly frames the villain as his own brother. There's some catharsis in this staging, leading to a show that ends up being bitter and violent. The violence is justified in odd displays of morality and green blood, where Ethan writes scenarios where it's okay to beat up kids and shoot the villain several times. Getting back to the more physical form of death, showcasing characters dying in cartoons also felt like a bit of a taboo. I mean, it was not uncommon for cartoons to feature characters who died, but death usually had stricter standards when it came to Saturday morning cartoons. Some cartoons could get away with this if death was treated more like a tragedy, but more often than not, a lot of cartoons just tried to steer away from the subject. For comparison, Voltron tried to hide death with comas and robots and all sorts of weird writing. But a similar cartoon, Robotech, wasn't afraid to show characters who died to stress the consequences of war. For the most part, however, death was edited out of cartoons, and mostly due to the negative reactions that it would generate. A perfect example of this is Transformers the movie. That film featured the death of Optimus Prime, which was apparently too tragic for children that Hasbro immediately course-corrected. They wrote Optimus Prime back into the Transformers show, and also edited the death of the leader Duke out of the G.I. Joe movie. Death was a gamble that most cartoons of the 1980s and 1990s were unwilling to risk. One of the few cartoons in S.M.A.S.H to feature graphic violence is Strongimals, a parody of both Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Thundercats. The premise of this cartoon is that the Strongimals come from a planet where they are at war with the War Pigs. The only way that they can defeat the pigs is if they attain peace, which is apparently a quantifiable element that you can acquire by killing hate, which they happen to find plenty of on Earth. This premise essentially escalates into the Strongimals hunting and often killing people who have hatred, so that they can acquire more peace. This is a pretty apt mockery of action cartoons that often try to be mindful of conflict, while still making it seem exciting and fun to kill people. Death is turned into more of a farce for peace, as a means of trying to rationalize murder. Ultimately, the Strongimals are not killed off by the war pigs, but instead forced out of the picture, as the cameo of Skip takes over their program. They too experience death through irrelevancy, and are quietly written out of the show. The concept of death in S.M.A.S.H also extends to cultural elements. This is best showcased in the episode All Cartoon Characters Say Don't Shut Up, a crossover episode which is an obvious parody of Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue. The key difference between these two cartoons is that instead of telling kids not to do drugs, the S.M.A.S.H episode is all about telling kids not to say the phrase, "shut up." This is treated in the episode like a real epidemic in America, stressing that the phrase can even kill people. It seems silly, but so was the fear of marijuana in the garbled war on drugs. This special is trying to steer kids away from saying shut up, but as previous episodes of S.M.A.S.H have already shown, cartoons already use the word shut up. Even pop star Johnny Rash has a song where he keeps saying shut up. The genie is out of the bottle, and the notion that people would be offended by the phrase is something that will decay over time, in the same way that perspectives on marijuana have changed over time. The intro's Barbara Bush stand-in tries to argue for an America where people don't say the phrase "shut up," as though it were traditional values. In other words, it's a fruitless attempt to save something that is not only dying, but should die. The entire run of the season builds up to the end of an era. Cartoons are being cancelled and replaced with even more shameless commercialism. Skip and Trebor find themselves at their most bitter of rivalries, where their careers are threatened. It's also the end for Johnny Rash when he is brought to court and later found guilty. However, the show does end on a hopeful note. The murder case is solved by one kid who taped every episode of S.M.A.S.H and noticed a clue in the background. This kid learned from her obsession with television and used that knowledge to make the world better. So the lesson here isn't so much that watching cartoons is going to fix the world, but that taking note of what these shows say and what is presented while reading between the lines can improve how we view our world. And her comprehension does inspire hope. She believes that the still missing sitcom star is still alive. She might not be alive, but there's hope present that death doesn't always have to be on the forefront of your mind. There can be hope that you can live another day. The series ends with a new show hosted by Skip, Trebor, and their estranged brother. Their third brother, however, quickly starts becoming the favorite of the audience. Skip and Trebor both look at each other uneasily, recognizing that their estranged brother could soar right past them in fame. So, their estranged brother is essentially the Grim Reaper, a specter of death that looms over them. So, every television show will eventually stop, and every person will eventually die. Saturday Morning All-Star Hits treats this creeping fear of no longer existing, with both the absurd uneasiness that it generates and the contentment that it deserves. Death is not so much something that we fight against, but something that we learn to live alongside. It's a natural and an inevitable part of life. So, maybe don't worry about it so much, have a sub, and just watch some cartoons.
Kids, school's out and summer's here, so start your day off with a cheer. Starting at 6:30, join that mischievous kitty, Heathcliff. At 7, have no fear, Police Academy is here. At 7:30, catch that wacky wabbit, Bugs Bunny and all his friends. At 8, Johnny Arcade turns you on to video power. Then at 8:30, there's Stone Age fun with the Flintstones. Weekdays, our morning cartoons will put a smile on your face. From 6:30 to 9, 50's your summertime place.